Okay, so now let's talk about externalities. Externalities are effects on other people to whom compensation is not made. If compensation for the effects on someone else were made, and this compensation were mutually agreed to, then that wouldn't be an externality, that would simply be called a purchase. For example, a thief imposes an external cost on other people in the sense that they steal from them and impose the cost of losing access to that property without compensation. This would be an externality. Externalities are all around us. Another example would be if I eat something that is loaded with garlic and onions and then stand nearby you while we talk. This would almost certainly make you worse off by virtue of me polluting the air around you. Despite this, it's still perfectly legal for me to eat garlic and onions, and it would be somewhat gauche of you to tell me to go away. But what about more extreme cases? What about the case of an oil company dumping byproducts of the oil refining process into public water? What about a factory that billows smoke into the air of the surrounding neighborhood? These actions would clearly impose costs on the surrounding people. Whether this constitutes a harm depends on the underlying property rights structure. For example, let's suppose you move into a house right next to a busy airport. So here's your house, right? And then we'll just draw an airport, a runway. Okay, apparently you live very, very close to it. Okay? Does the noise and pollution from the airport impose an externality on you? Now, something to consider. You moved into this house knowing full well that the airport was there and that airports produce both noise and pollution. Further, the airport has been there for several years at this point. So while one might intuitively say yes to the question of does the airport impose an externality on you, the answer is far more subtle than you might think. Remember, an externality is an uncompensated imposition of a cost, in this case, or a benefit. In the case of buying a home near the airport, you were compensated for this in the form of a lower price for your house. As another way to think about this, you purchased the house knowing full well that there was an airport nearby and that airports produce both noise and pollution. In a typical law and economics course, this would be referred to as coming to the nuisance. As we know, an externality can only exist if there are two people, one of which is imposing a cost on the other. If you didn't show up, there would not be anything to debate about whether there were an externality or not. By buying the house with the knowledge that there was an airport nearby, you internalized that cost, and it was revealed to you in the form of the lower price for the house. The airport, in other words, was there first. By virtue of this, the airport had laid claim to the right to make noise and pollute. You came to this nuisance fully knowing it. In other words, your action was to buy a house near an airport. Your action was not buying a house only to then discover that the airport was nearby. As an interesting thought exercise, what if you were there first and someone wanted to build a major metropolitan international airport nearby? How would this change the preceding analysis?